So here's the thing about being broke in your 20s, you'll take any apartment you can get, even when every instinct you have is screaming at you to run. I should have listened to those instincts. I really should have. My name's Jake, and I'm telling you this story because I need someone else to know what happened at 1247 Pine Street, apartment 4B. Not because I'm looking for sympathy or anything like that, but because I think other people need to be warned. The building's still there, still renting out units to desperate college kids and 20-somethings who can't afford anywhere decent. Someone needs to know the truth. It all started 3 months ago when I was scrolling through Craigslist at 2 a.m., desperately searching for anything I could afford on my barista salary. Most places in the city wanted first and last month's rent plus a security deposit that was basically my entire life savings. I was about to give up and crash on my buddy Mike's couch for another month when I saw the listing. Spacious 1BR apartment, historic building, $600 per month. Available immediately. Serious inquiries only. $600 in downtown? That was like finding a unicorn. The photos looked decent enough, hardwood floors, big windows, even a little balcony. The building looked old but not sketchy, you know? Just vintage. I fired off an email before I could second guess myself. The landlord, this guy named Mr. Hendricks, got back to me within an hour. At 2:30 a.m. That should have been red flag number 1, but desperation makes you ignore a lot of warning signs. He said he could show me the place the next morning if I was serious about renting. I met him outside 1247 Pine Street at 10 a.m. sharp. The building was this old brick thing, probably built in the 1920s, with those cool fire escapes zigzagging down the front. Mr. Hendricks was exactly what you'd picture when you think sketchy landlord. Probably in his 60s, greasy gray hair, wore a stained polo shirt that had seen better days. But hey, beggars can't be choosers, right? "You're Jake?" he asked, looking me up and down like he was deciding if I was worth his time. "Yeah, that's me. Thanks for meeting me so early." He grunted and pulled out this massive ring of keys that looked like something a medieval jailer would carry. "Let's get this over with. I got other things to do today." Real charmer, this guy. We took this ancient elevator that groaned and shuddered like it might give up at any second. The hallway on the 4th floor was dimly lit and smelled like old carpet and something else I couldn't identify. Not bad exactly, just old. Apartment 4B was at the end of the hall, and when Mr. Hendricks unlocked the door, I had to admit I was pretty impressed. The place was way bigger than I expected, with those beautiful original hardwood floors and huge windows that let in tons of natural light. The kitchen was small but functional, and the bedroom was actually big enough for more than just a bed. "So what's the catch?" I asked, because there's always a catch with places this cheap. Mr. Hendricks was standing by the window, not really looking at me. "No catch. Just some house rules you gotta follow." "House rules?" "Yeah. Building's got some quirks. Been here a long time, you know? Things work a certain way, and as long as you respect that, you'll be fine." I waited for him to explain, but he just stood there staring out the window. Finally, I pressed him. "What kind of rules are we talking about? I'll give you the list if you decide to take the place." "Standard stuff, mostly. Quiet hours, no parties, that kind of thing." Something about the way he said standard stuff made my skin crawl a little, but the apartment was perfect and I was desperate. "Okay, yeah. I want it. When can I move in?" "Today if you want. Cash only, first month up front." I should have asked more questions. Should have wondered why he was so eager to rent to the first person who showed up. Should have asked about the previous tenant, or why the place was available so suddenly. But I was 23, broke, and tired of sleeping on Mike's couch. I counted out $600 in 20s and 10s, and just like that, apartment 4B was mine. Mr. Hendricks handed me 2 keys, one for the apartment, one for the building's front door, and a sealed envelope. "What's this?" I asked, holding up the envelope. "The rules I mentioned. Read them tonight, follow them exactly. And Jake." He looked at me directly for the first time since we'd met. His eyes were this weird pale blue, almost gray. Don't think you can ignore them just because they seem strange. Previous tenants who thought they knew better? Well, let's just say their leases ended early. Before I could ask what he meant by that, he was gone, leaving me standing alone in my new apartment with a sealed envelope in my hands. I spent the rest of the day moving my pathetic collection of belongings from Mike's place. Didn't take long, just some clothes, my laptop, a mattress, and a couple boxes of random stuff. By evening, I was officially a resident of 1247 Pine Street. It wasn't until around 10 p.m., after I'd ordered some Chinese takeout and was sitting on my mattress eating lo mein straight from the container, that I remembered the envelope. I tore it open and found a single sheet of paper with what looked like typewritten text. Residential guidelines for 1247 Pine Street, apartment 4B. The following rules must be observed at all times for the safety and comfort of all residents. 1. Do not use the elevator between 11:47 p.m. and 12:03 a.m. Use the stairs only during this time. 2. If you hear classical music playing after midnight, do not investigate the source. Return to your apartment immediately. 3. The laundry room in the basement is off-limits on Sundays between sunset and sunrise. 4. If you encounter another resident in the hallway who claims to live in apartment 4B, do not engage in conversation. Return to your apartment and lock the door. 5. Never prop open the building's front door after 10 p.m., regardless of the reason. 6. If the elevator stops on the 5th floor without being called, exit immediately and use the stairs. 7. Do not acknowledge or respond to anyone knocking on your door between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Failure to observe these guidelines may result in immediate lease termination. Management is not responsible for incidents that occur due to non-compliance. I read the list 3 times waiting for it to make sense. This had to be some kind of joke, right? Like an elaborate prank for new tenants or something. The rules were so specific and weird that they couldn't possibly be serious. I mean, come on. If you encounter another resident who claims to live in apartment 4B, there was only one apartment 4B and it was mine. And what was all this stuff about the elevator and classical music? It sounded like the setup for some cheesy horror movie. I folded the paper and tossed it on my kitchen counter, figuring I'd ask some of the other tenants about it when I ran into them. Probably just Mr. Hendrick's weird sense of humor. That first night I slept like a rock. The apartment was quiet, the bed was comfortable, well, the mattress on the floor was comfortable, and for the first time in weeks I had my own space again. I woke up feeling pretty good about my decision. The weirdness started on night 2. I'd spent the day settling in, buying some basic furniture from thrift stores, and trying to make the place feel more like home. Around 11 p.m., I was on my laptop applying for some freelance writing gigs when I heard it. It was faint at first, drifting through the walls like it was coming from somewhere far away. Classical music, just like the rules had mentioned. Piano, maybe with some strings. It was actually kind of pretty, in a haunting sort of way. My first instinct was to go check it out. Maybe one of my neighbors was a classical music fan, or there was a radio playing somewhere. But as I reached for the door handle, I remembered rule number 2. If you hear classical music playing after midnight, do not investigate the source. I checked my phone. 11:43 p.m. Not quite midnight yet. The music continued, getting slightly louder. It sounded like it was coming from the hallway, or maybe from one of the other apartments on my floor. I put my ear to the door, trying to figure out exactly where it was coming from. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. According to my phone, it was now 12:01 a.m. The music was playing after midnight, just like the rules said it would. I backed away from the door like it was on fire. This was just a coincidence, right? Someone happened to be playing classical music late at night. It didn't mean the rules were real or that something supernatural was going on. But I didn't investigate. I went back to my laptop and tried to ignore the music, which continued for exactly 1 hour before stopping abruptly at 1:01 a.m. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, I decided to do some reconnaissance. I needed to know more about this building and its history. If there was something weird going on, I wanted to understand what I'd gotten myself into. I started by talking to my neighbors. The woman who lived across the hall, Mrs. Patterson, was probably in her 70s and seemed friendly enough. When I knocked on her door and introduced myself, she invited me in for coffee. "Oh, you're in 4B, she said, and I swear her smile faltered just a little bit. "How are you finding it?" "It's great," I lied. "Really spacious." "Hey, I was wondering, do you know anything about the history of this building?" Mr. Hendricks mentioned it had been here a long time. Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee even though she'd already added sugar. "It's an old building," she said finally. "Built in 1923. Lots of history." "What kind of history?" "The usual kind. People live here, people move away." She wouldn't meet my eyes. "You know how it is." I tried a different approach. "I heard someone playing classical music last night. Beautiful music, actually. Do you know who that might have been?" Mrs. Patterson's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. "I didn't hear any music," she said quickly. "I go to bed early. Always have." But I could tell she was lying. There was something in her eyes, like fear mixed with sadness. "Mrs. Patterson, is there something I should know about apartment 4B? Or about this building in general?" She was quiet for such a long time I thought she might not answer. Finally, she looked at me directly. "Just follow the rules, dear. Whatever rules you were given, follow them exactly. Don't think you're smarter than they are. But what are the rules protecting me from? I can't tell you that. She stood up abruptly, clearly ending our conversation. But I can tell you that every tenant who's ignored the rules, well, they don't live here anymore. As I walked back to my apartment, Mrs. Patterson's words echoed in my head. Every tenant who ignored the rules didn't live here anymore. That could mean they just moved out, right? Found better places, broke their leases, whatever. It didn't have to mean something sinister. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. That evening, I decided to test one of the rules. Not because I wanted to be reckless, but because I needed to know if they were real or just elaborate nonsense. I picked the most harmless-seeming one. Rule number 1 about not using the elevator between 11:47 p.m. and 12:03 a.m. At 11:45, I positioned myself in the hallway near the elevator. Everything seemed normal. The building was quiet, just the usual sounds of people settling in for the night. A TV playing softly behind someone's door, the distant hum of traffic outside. At exactly 11:47, I pressed the elevator call button. Nothing happened for a few seconds and I started to feel pretty stupid. Then I heard the mechanical whirring of the elevator starting up, cables moving, the car ascending from wherever it had been. The elevator arrived and the doors opened with their usual ding. The car was empty just like it should be. But something was wrong with the lighting. Instead of the normal fluorescent brightness, there was this dim, yellowish glow that made everything look sickly and old-fashioned. And there was a smell. Not bad exactly, but strange. Like old books and mothballs and something else I couldn't identify. I stood there for a moment, staring into the elevator car. This was my chance to test the rule. Either I could step inside and nothing would happen, proving the rules were nonsense, or something would happen that I really didn't want to experience. The elevator doors started to close and I made my decision. I stepped back, letting them shut without getting on. The elevator didn't go anywhere. I could hear it just sitting there, waiting. At exactly 12:03 a.m., the elevator dinged softly and I heard it descend back to the ground floor. I used the stairs. As I climbed back up to the 4th floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that I just dodged a bullet. The rules weren't a joke. Something was definitely not normal about this building. But I still didn't know what I was dealing with and I was starting to think that might be for the best. The next morning, I woke up to find a note slipped under my door. Same cream-colored paper as the original rules with the same typewritten text. We noticed you followed the guidelines last night. Good choice. Some lessons are better learned through observation than experience. Management. I stared at the note, my hands shaking slightly. Someone was watching me. Someone knew exactly what I'd done the night before, knew that I'd called the elevator but hadn't gotten on. But who? And how? I looked through my peephole at the empty hallway, then checked the locks on my door. Everything was secure just like I'd left it. Whoever had delivered this note had done it silently, probably in the middle of the night while I was sleeping. That's when I realized something that made my stomach drop. The note proved that the rules weren't just superstitions or the weird preferences of an eccentric landlord. They were active warnings about real dangers that someone or something was monitoring constantly. I was being watched by whatever lived in this building. And I was starting to understand that apartment 4B came with a lot more than just cheap rent and hardwood floors. It came with something that didn't want me to leave. The note from management changed everything. Knowing I was being watched made every creak of the old building feel like surveillance, every shadow in my peripheral vision a potential threat. I started second-guessing every move I made, wondering if someone or something was taking notes on my behavior. I tried to go about my normal routine, but paranoia was eating at me. During the day, I'd catch myself checking the locks on my door obsessively, or peeking through the peephole to make sure the hallway was empty. At night, I barely slept, jumping at every sound. But the worst part? I was starting to get curious about the other rules. Now that I knew they were real, I found myself wondering what would happen if I broke them. What was so dangerous about the laundry room on Sunday nights? Why couldn't I prop open the front door after 10 p.m.? And what the hell was this thing about encountering another resident who claimed to live in my apartment? That last one really got to me. How could someone else claim to live in 4B when I was obviously living here? Unless there had been previous tenants who never really left. I decided I needed to do some serious research. If I was going to survive whatever was happening in this building, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. The next morning, I headed to the public library downtown. I figured if there was something weird about 1247 Pine Street, there might be newspaper articles or public records that could give me some answers. It took me about 3 hours of digging through old newspaper archives and city records before I found what I was looking for. And man, I really wish I hadn't. The building had a history, all right. A seriously messed up history. The first article I found was from 1962, Mysterious Death in Downtown Apartment Building. A tenant named Robert Walsh had been found dead in apartment 4B after neighbors complained about a smell. The weird thing was he'd been dead for almost 2 weeks, but his rent had been paid in cash, slipped under the landlord's office door every month, for 3 months after his death. 3 months. Someone had been paying his rent and pretending he was still alive for 3 months. The police never figured out who was making the payments. I kept digging. 1978. Woman vanishes from locked apartment. Sarah Chin, tenant of apartment 4B, had disappeared without a trace. Her door was locked from the inside, all her belongings were still there, but she was gone. No signs of struggle, no broken windows, nothing. It was like she'd just evaporated. 1985. Strange sounds plagued downtown building. Multiple tenants had reported hearing footsteps, music and voices coming from apartment 4B, even though it had been vacant for 6 months after the previous tenant broke his lease and moved out suddenly. The pattern went on and on. Every few years, something happened to whoever lived in 4B. Death, disappearance, or they'd just abandon everything and flee in the middle of the night. But here's the thing that really freaked me out. According to the records, apartment 4B had never actually been vacant for more than a few weeks at a time. Even when tenants disappeared or died, new people moved in almost immediately. People like me. Desperate, broke, willing to ignore red flags for cheap rent. I printed out everything I could find and headed back to my apartment with a folder full of articles that made my skin crawl. But I needed more information and I knew exactly who to ask. Mrs. Patterson had lived in the building longer than anyone. If these articles were accurate, she'd been here through at least 3 of the incidents involving 4B. She had to know something. I knocked on her door around 6 p.m., folder tucked under my arm. "Jake," she said when she opened the door. "How can I help you? I need to ask you about the history of this building. Specifically about apartment 4B. Her face went pale, but she stepped aside to let me in. "What did you find?" I spread the newspaper articles across her coffee table. "I found these at the library. Mrs. Patterson, people have been dying or disappearing from my apartment for decades. What's going on here?" She stared at the articles for a long time, her hands shaking slightly. Finally, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "I was hoping you wouldn't find out," she said quietly. "I was hoping you'd just follow the rules and be safe." "Safe from what?" Mrs. Patterson walked to her window and stared out at the building across the street. "His name was David Reeves," she said. "He lived in 4B from 1954 to 1961. He was a nice young man about your age. Worked at the bank downtown, always said hello in the hallways. What happened to him? He fell in love with a woman named Eleanor. She lived in 3A at the time. They were planning to get married, move to a bigger place, start a family." Mrs. Patterson's voice was barely above a whisper. "But Eleanor didn't love him back. She was just being polite, you know? She was seeing someone else, someone David didn't know about." I waited for her to continue, my stomach already knotting with dread. "When David found out, he lost his mind. Completely lost it. He confronted Eleanor in the hallway one night, and when she tried to walk away, She took a shaky breath. He pushed her down the stairs. Broke her neck. Jesus." David was so horrified by what he'd done that he went back to his apartment and hanged himself from the light fixture in the bedroom. That same light fixture that's probably still there in your apartment. I thought about the old-fashioned light fixture in my bedroom, the one that looked original to the building. My throat felt tight. "But that's not the end of the story," Mrs. Patterson continued. "David couldn't let go. His guilt, his obsession with Eleanor, his desperation to make things right, it kept him anchored to that apartment. He never moved on." "You're talking about a ghost." "I'm talking about something much worse than a ghost, Jake. David has been living in apartment 4B for over 60 years. Every tenant who moves in becomes part of his story. He watches them, learns about them, tries to understand how normal people live and love. The pieces were starting to come together, and I really didn't like the picture they were forming. The rules are the only thing keeping you safe from David's attention. As long as you follow them exactly, he mostly ignores you. He's learned that tenants who follow the rules are boring, predictable. But the ones who break them, what happens to them?" Mrs. Patterson turned back to face me, and I could see genuine fear in her eyes. "David gets curious about them. He starts paying attention. And once David starts paying attention to a tenant, that tenant becomes part of his obsession. He tries to make them stay forever. That's why people disappear. Or die. David doesn't understand that living people need food, water, sleep. When he decides he wants to keep someone, he just keeps them. in ways that don't always work out for the living. I felt sick. Why doesn't anyone do anything about it? Why not just demolish the building or call in priests or paranormal investigators or something? Do you think people haven't tried? Mrs. Patterson laughed bitterly. David owns this building now in every way that matters. He's the one collecting rent, maintaining the property, finding new tenants. Mr. Hendricks is just his representative. David makes sure the rent stays cheap so desperate people will move into 4B. He needs a constant stream of tenants to study. Then why are you still here? Why haven't you moved? Because I'm safe. I've been following the rules for 15 years, and David has no interest in me. I'm old, set in my ways, boring. But you? She looked at me with something like pity. You're young, curious, full of life. You're exactly the kind of person David finds fascinating. That night, I lay in bed staring at the light fixture Mrs. Patterson had mentioned, wondering if David Reeves had really hanged himself from those same metal chains 60 years ago. Every shadow in the room seemed to shift and move, and I found myself listening for sounds that shouldn't be there. Around 2:30 a.m. I heard knocking on my door. Soft, polite knocking like someone was trying not to wake the neighbors. Rule number 7. Do not acknowledge or respond to anyone knocking on your door between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing as the knocking continued. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Then again. Jake? A voice called softly through the door. Are you awake? It was a man's voice, friendly and concerned. The kind of voice that belonged to a good neighbor who might need to borrow a cup of sugar or warn you about a water leak. I saw your light on, the voice continued. I wanted to make sure everything was okay, but I hadn't turned on any lights. I'd been lying in complete darkness. The knocking became more insistent. Jake, I know you're in there. I'm David from down the hall. We should meet properly. My blood turned to ice water. David from down the hall. David, who had died in this apartment 60 years ago. David, who was knocking on the door to his own former home. I've been watching you, the voice said, and now it sounded less friendly and more hungry. You're interesting, Jake. Different from the others. I think we could be friends. The knocking stopped, but I could hear something else. Footsteps pacing back and forth in the hallway outside my door. Slow, deliberate steps like someone thinking hard about something. I know you found the newspaper articles, David's voice said. Clever boy. Most tenants don't figure it out so quickly. That shows intelligence. Initiative. I like that. The footsteps stopped directly outside my door. I can smell your fear, Jake. It's intoxicating. Most people who live here are just existing, going through the motions of life without really living. But you're different. You're alive in ways that remind me of what I used to be. Something scraped against my door. Long, slow scratches like fingernails dragging across wood. I want to show you something, Jake. Something wonderful. All you have to do is open the door. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. I pulled my blankets over my head and tried to block out the sound, but it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Jake. The voice was no longer friendly. It was commanding, desperate, with an edge of madness that made my teeth ache. Open the door. The scratching turned into pounding. The entire door shook with each impact, and I could hear the wood splintering. Then, at exactly 4 a.m., everything stopped. Silence. I waited another hour before I worked up the courage to look through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but my door was covered in deep scratches that definitely hadn't been there before. The next morning I found another note. You're learning. But curiosity killed the cat, Jake. Some questions are dangerous to ask. Some answers are dangerous to know. Stop digging or we'll have to have a more personal conversation. Dr. David Reeves. I was in deep trouble and I knew it. My research had attracted his attention, exactly like Mrs. Patterson had warned me it would. Now he was interested in me personally, and according to everything I'd learned, that was basically a death sentence. But I couldn't just sit around waiting to become another newspaper article. I needed help, and I needed it fast. That afternoon, I called Mike, my buddy whose couch I'd been crashing on before I found this place. Dude, you sound terrible, he said when he heard my voice. What's going on? I need to ask you something, and I need you to not think I'm crazy. Okay. Do you know anything about paranormal investigators in the city? Like legitimate ones, not TV show wannabes. Mike was quiet for a moment. Jake, what kind of trouble are you in? The supernatural kind. To his credit, Mike didn't laugh or hang up on me. My girlfriend's sister is into that stuff. I can ask her for some contacts. But Jake, maybe you should just move out. Find another place. I don't think it's that simple. I looked around my apartment, wondering if David was listening to this conversation. I think I'm in too deep to just leave. That night, I got a call from someone named Elena Rodriguez. Mike's girlfriend's sister had given her my number, told her I needed help with a supernatural situation. Elena ran a small paranormal investigation service and agreed to meet me the next day. We met at a coffee shop far from Pine Street. Elena was about 30, with serious dark eyes and the kind of presence that made you feel like she'd seen some things. When I told her about the rules, the history of apartment 4B, and my encounters with David Reeves, she listened without interruption. "You're dealing with what we call a territorial entity," she said when I finished. "David isn't just haunting that apartment, he owns it. He's claimed it as his domain, and everyone who lives there becomes part of his collection." His collection? Think of it like this. David was obsessed with understanding love and relationships when he was alive. That obsession has only grown stronger in death. Every tenant who moves into 4B becomes a subject for him to study. He watches how they live, who they care about, what makes them afraid or happy. And the ones who break the rules? The ones who break the rules get his personal attention. He stops just watching and starts interacting. And Jake, based on what you've told me, you're already past the point of just being watched. Elena pulled out a small bag filled with what looked like various herbs and small objects. "I can help you, but it's going to be dangerous. David has had 60 years to strengthen his hold on that building. Getting him to let go of you won't be easy. What do I have to do?" "First, we need to understand exactly what David wants. Then we need to give him a reason to leave you alone." She met my eyes directly. "Or we need to find a way to make him leave permanently." That night, as I lay in bed trying to process everything Elena had told me, I heard the classical music again. But this time it wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from inside my apartment. I sat up slowly, trying to locate the source of the music. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the air with a haunting melody that made my skin crawl. Then I saw him. Standing in the corner of my bedroom, barely visible in the darkness, was the outline of a man. Average height, wearing what looked like clothes from the 1950s. He wasn't moving, just standing there watching me. "Hello, Jake," David Reeves said, his voice echoing strangely in the small room. "I think it's time we had that personal conversation. I've never been so terrified in my entire life. Not even close. Every muscle in my body locked up and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think." David Reeves was standing in my bedroom, the same bedroom where he'd killed himself 60 years ago. He looked exactly like what you'd picture when you think of a guy from the 1950s. Neat hair parted on the side, white button-down shirt, dark slacks. But there was something wrong with his edges, like he wasn't quite solid. And his eyes. God, his eyes were the worst part. They were too bright, too focused, like he was seeing everything about me all at once. "Don't be afraid," he said, taking a step closer to my bed. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk." I found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "This isn't real. You're dead." David laughed and the sound made my skin crawl. Dead is such a limiting concept, don't you think? I prefer to think of myself as persistent. He moved around the room like he owned it, which I guess he did. He ran his fingers along the walls, the furniture, touching everything with this weird familiarity. "I've been watching you, Jake. You're different from the others. Most people who move into my apartment are running from something: debt, relationships, family problems. But you're running towards something, aren't you?" I didn't answer, but David nodded like I had. "You moved here because you wanted independence. You wanted to prove you could make it on your own in the big city. That takes courage. I admire courage. What do you want?" David sat down in the chair by my window, crossing his legs like this was just a normal conversation between roommates. "I want to understand you. I've been alone for so long, Jake. 60 years of watching people live their lives while I'm stuck here, unable to move forward. Do you know what that's like? Then move on. Leave this place. Find peace or whatever." "I can't." His voice turned bitter. "I'm anchored here by what I did to Eleanor. My guilt, my obsession with her, it's like chains. But maybe if I could understand how normal people form connections, how they love without destroying." He trailed off, staring out the window at the street below. "You've been killing people," I said, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. "The tenants who disappeared. I never meant for that to happen." David looked genuinely sad. "I just wanted to keep them close, to study how they lived. But living people are so fragile. They need things I'd forgotten about: food, water, sleep. By the time I remembered, it was often too late." The casual way he talked about accidentally killing people made me sick. But I also heard something else in his voice: loneliness. This guy had been trapped here for 60 years with nothing but his guilt and his obsession. No wonder he was insane. Elena Rodriguez, I said suddenly. You know I've been talking to her, don't you? David's expression darkened. The paranormal investigator. Yes, I'm aware. She's helped other people escape entities like me. Clever woman. Are you going to stop me from seeing her? Stop you? No, Jake. I'm curious to see what she'll try. It's been years since someone made a real effort to challenge me. It might be entertaining. The way he said entertaining made my blood run cold. This wasn't just a lonely ghost looking for company. This was something that had become twisted by decades of isolation and guilt. I have a proposal for you, David continued. Stop trying to banish me or escape me, and I'll make your life here very comfortable. Better than comfortable. I can make sure you never want for anything, money, success, even companionship. All I ask in return is that you let me observe you. Let me learn from you. And if I say no? David's smile was gentle, but his eyes were ice cold. Then you'll join my collection just like the others. But it won't be quick, Jake. I'll keep you conscious for as long as possible so I can study how you change under stress, how you break down, how you adapt. I forced myself to meet his gaze. I need time to think about it. Of course, take all the time you need. David stood up, smoothing down his shirt. But don't take too long. My patience isn't infinite. He walked toward the bedroom door, then paused and looked back at me. Oh, and Jake? Your friend Elena will be here tomorrow night to attempt some kind of cleansing ritual, won't she? You might want to warn her that I don't respond well to uninvited guests. Then he was gone, just gone. No fading away or dissolving into mist. 1 second he was there, the next he wasn't. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat up in bed until sunrise, staring at the corner where David had been standing, wondering if he was still there watching me, just invisible now. The next morning, I called Elena and told her what had happened. She listened without interrupting, then was quiet for a long moment. Jake, this is worse than I thought. David isn't just territorial, he's evolved. Most entities stuck in one place for that long either fade away or become mindless. But David has been using the tenets to stay sharp, to keep learning. He's become something new. What does that mean for us? It means a standard cleansing or banishment won't work. David is too powerful, too entrenched in that building. We need to attack the source of his anchoring, his guilt over Eleanor's death. How do we do that? We make him face what he did. Really face it, not just the romanticized version he's been telling himself for 60 years. We force him to confront the truth about his obsession and what it cost. Elena explained her plan. That evening, she would come to the apartment with a psychic medium named Marcus who specialized in communicating with violent spirits. Together, they would attempt to channel Eleanor's spirit and force David to have the conversation he'd been avoiding for 6 decades. It's dangerous, Elena warned. If David feels cornered, he might lash out. He could hurt all of us. What's the alternative? I can't live like this, and I can't let him keep killing people. Then we do this tonight. But Jake, you need to understand, there's a good chance this won't end well for any of us. That evening, Elena arrived with Marcus, a thin guy about 40 with prematurely gray hair and tired eyes. They brought candles, sage, salt, and some kind of electronic equipment that Marcus said would help detect spiritual activity. The entity's already here, Marcus said the moment he stepped into my apartment. I can feel him watching us. We set up in the living room, arranging candles in a circle and burning sage to cleanse the spiritual atmosphere, whatever that meant. Marcus had me sit in the center of the circle while Elena positioned herself near the front door. Remember, Elena said, once we start this, David will know what we're trying to do. He'll try to stop us, probably violently. Don't break the circle no matter what happens. Marcus began some kind of chant in a language I didn't recognize. The temperature in the room started dropping fast, and the candle flames began flickering even though there was no breeze. David, Marcus called out, his voice echoing strangely in the small room. We know you're here. We know you're listening. It's time to face what you've been running from. The lights went out. All of them simultaneously. In the darkness, I heard David's voice, but it was different now. Angry, defensive. You have no right to be here. This is my home. This was Eleanor's home too, Marcus replied calmly. Before you murdered her. The temperature plummeted even further. I could see my breath in the candlelight and frost was forming on the windows. I didn't murder her, David snarled, his voice coming from everywhere at once. It was an accident. I loved her. You killed her because she didn't love you back, Elena said. You killed her because your ego couldn't handle rejection. Something crashed in the kitchen, plates or glasses shattering against the wall. Shut up. David's voice was no longer human. It was a roar of rage and pain that seemed to shake the entire building. You don't understand. None of you understand. Marcus continued his chanting, louder now, and I started to see something forming in the corner of the room. A figure in a 1950s dress, translucent but becoming more solid by the second. Eleanor. She was beautiful, just like you'd expect from the era, dark hair in victory rolls, red lipstick, elegant dress. But her neck was bent at an unnatural angle, and there was sadness in her eyes that made my heart break. "Hello, David," she said softly. The temperature in the room returned to normal so fast I got dizzy. David materialized across from Eleanor, and for the first time since I'd seen him, he looked genuinely afraid. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I never meant." "Yes, you did." Her voice was gentle but firm. "You meant to hurt me, David. You wanted me to pay for not loving you the way you loved me. That's not true, isn't it? Think back to that night. Really think back. When you found out about Thomas, when you saw us together, what did you feel?" David's form was flickering, becoming less solid. "I felt betrayed." "You felt entitled," Eleanor corrected. "You felt like I owed you my love because you wanted it so badly. And when you realized I had the right to choose someone else, you decided to punish me. I lost control. I was hurt. You grabbed me by the throat and threw me down the stairs," Eleanor said, her voice still eerily calm. "You watched me die, David. And then you went back to your apartment and killed yourself, not out of guilt, but because you couldn't face the consequences of what you'd done." David was becoming more translucent by the second, but his voice was getting louder, more desperate. "I've been trying to understand. All these years, I've been trying to learn how to love properly." "No, David. You've been trying to justify what you did. You've been collecting people, studying them, hoping to find some evidence that what you felt for me was real love instead of obsession." Eleanor turned to look at me, and her broken neck made the movement horrible to watch. "But love isn't possession, is it, Jake? Love isn't about keeping someone trapped with you forever." I found my voice. "No. Love is about letting someone choose to be with you. Every day." David let out a sound that might have been a sob. "But I'm so lonely. I've been alone for so long." "That's the consequence of what you chose," Eleanor said. "You chose violence over acceptance, possession over love. And now you have to live with that choice." "I can't move on," David whispered. "I've tried. I'm anchored here." Eleanor finally smiled, and despite her broken neck, it was beautiful. "No, David. You're not anchored by guilt. You're anchored by selfishness. You're still here because you refuse to accept that what you did was wrong. You refuse to let go of your fantasy that I belong to you." She walked toward him, and David actually backed away. "I forgive you, David. Not because you deserve it, but because I choose to be free of the anger I felt when you killed me. But forgiving you doesn't mean excusing what you did. And it doesn't mean I'm going to help you avoid the consequences." "Eleanor, please." "Goodbye, David. It's time for both of us to go." Eleanor looked at Marcus. "Break the circle. Now." Marcus gestured frantically, and Elena kicked salt across the floor, disrupting the protective circle we'd created. The moment the circle broke, David let out a scream that shook the windows. But instead of attacking us like I'd expected, he began to dissolve. Not fading away, dissolving like he was made of smoke and someone had opened a window. "This isn't over," he managed to say as he fell apart. "I won't let you take this away from me." Then he was gone. Eleanor turned to me one last time. "Thank you for listening to his victims. For caring about the people who disappeared. Will he come back?" "Not tonight. But Jake, David isn't gone. He's just been temporarily disrupted. What we did tonight broke his connection to this apartment, but not his connection to the building. He'll reform probably in a few days." My heart sank. "So this was all for nothing?" "No. Now you know the truth about what he is and what he wants. And more importantly, now he knows that you're not afraid to fight back." Eleanor was already becoming translucent again, preparing to move on to wherever she was supposed to go. "What do I do when he comes back?" "That," she said with a sad smile, "is up to you." Then she was gone, and it was just me, Elena, and Marcus sitting in my apartment surrounded by melted candles and salt. "Well," Elena said after a long moment, "that went better than expected." "Better? David's still going to come back." "Yes, but now he knows we can hurt him. And more importantly, now he knows that Eleanor won't help him justify what he's become." Marcus was already packing up his equipment. "You've got maybe 3 days before he's strong enough to manifest again. What are you going to do?" I looked around my apartment, my cheap, haunted, dangerous apartment that I somehow couldn't imagine leaving. I'm going to get ready for round 2. The next 3 days were the strangest of my life. My apartment felt completely different without David's presence. The air was lighter, warmer. The shadows looked like normal shadows instead of potential hiding spots for supernatural stalkers. For the first time since moving in, I actually felt like I was living in my own space. But I knew it wouldn't last. Elena had given me her number and told me to call the moment I felt David's presence returning. Marcus had left me with some protective items, blessed salt, iron nails to hammer into the windowsills, and a small silver pendant that was supposed to repel malevolent spirits. I spent those 3 days doing research and making plans. If David was going to come back stronger and angrier, I needed to be ready with something more permanent than another seance. The answer came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Patterson. On the second day, she knocked on my door carrying a plate of cookies and wearing an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Hope. "Jake, dear," she said when I let her in, "the building feels different. Peaceful. What did you do?" I told her about Eleanor and the confrontation with David. Mrs. Patterson listened with tears in her eyes. "Eleanor was such a sweet girl," she said when I finished. "I was living here when it happened, in 2A back then. I heard her scream that night, heard the sound when she fell. And then David's apartment went quiet for 3 days before they found his body." "Did you know David when he was alive?" "Well, yes. He seemed like such a nice young man, always polite in the hallways. But there was something intense about him. The way he looked at Eleanor like she was the only person in the world who mattered. It wasn't healthy even then." Mrs. Patterson reached into her purse and pulled out a small leather journal, old and worn. "I've been keeping this for 60 years, waiting for the right moment to give it to someone. It's David's diary. I found it when they were cleaning out his apartment after he died." My hands shook as I took the journal. "Have you read it?" "Once. It was disturbing. But Jake, I think it might contain the key to stopping him permanently." That night, I sat down with David's diary and started reading. Mrs. Patterson was right, it was disturbing as hell. The entries started normal enough, just a young guy writing about his job, his hopes for the future, his growing feelings for Eleanor. But as the months went on, the entries became obsessive. David wrote about following Eleanor to the grocery store, to work, on dates with other men. He documented her daily routines, her favorite foods, the clothes she wore. He even wrote about going through her mail when she left it unattended in the lobby. The final entries, written in the weeks before Eleanor's death, were the worst. David had convinced himself that Eleanor was in love with him but afraid to show it. He wrote elaborate fantasies about their future together, about how grateful she would be once he rescued her from the inferior men she was dating. The last entry was dated the day Eleanor died. Asterisk, "She's been avoiding me for weeks now, ever since I told her how I felt. But I saw her with Thomas again today and I finally understood. She's not avoiding me because she doesn't love me, she's avoiding me because she loves me too much. She's scared of the intensity of what we have together. Tonight, I'm going to tell her that it's okay to be afraid, but we can't let fear keep us apart. I'm going to show her that what we have is worth fighting for." Asterisk. I had to put the journal down and take a break after reading that. David had been so deep in his delusion that he literally couldn't see reality. In his mind, Eleanor's fear of him was proof that she loved him. But the diary gave me an idea. A terrible, dangerous idea that might be the only way to stop David permanently. The next morning I called Elena. "I think I know how to end this," I told her. "But you're not going to like it." "What do you mean?" "David is anchored here by his obsession with Eleanor and his refusal to accept the truth about what he did. But what if we could make him experience it from Eleanor's perspective? What if we could force him to feel her fear, her pain, her desperation?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. "Jake, what you're talking about is psychological torture. Even for a murderous spirit, that's what he's been doing to tenants for 60 years, I interrupted. "He's been trapping people, studying their fear, feeding off their desperation. Maybe it's time he experienced what that feels like. How would we even do something like that?" "The diary. It's full of his thoughts, his feelings, his perspective on what happened. If Marcus could use it as a focus to reverse the psychic connection. You want to trap David in a psychic loop where he experiences Eleanor's death from her point of view, over and over again until he truly understands what he did to her. Until the weight of that understanding breaks his obsession." Elena sighed. "It might work. But Jake, if we do this and it goes wrong, David won't just kill you. He'll make you suffer in ways that will make his previous victims look lucky." "I know. But I can't keep living like this. And I can't let him keep hurting people." That evening, Elena returned with Marcus and a new piece of equipment. some kind of modified EMF detector that Marcus said could amplify psychic resonance. They set up in my living room just like before, but this time Marcus placed David's diary in the center of the circle. Once we start this, Marcus warned, there's no stopping it. The psychic loop will continue until David either breaks free or breaks down completely. And we'll all be trapped in here with him while it happens. I nodded. Let's do it. Marcus began his chanting, and almost immediately the temperature dropped. But this time, David's presence felt different, more urgent, more desperate. You came back, his voice echoed through the apartment. I was hoping you would. Hello, David, I called out. We brought you a present. David materialized near the window, but something was wrong with his appearance. He looked less solid than before, more fragmented, like a TV with bad reception. What did you do to me? He demanded. I can barely hold myself together. We showed you the truth about Eleanor, Elena said. About what you really did to her. I loved her. You killed her. David's form flickered with rage. I won't let you destroy what we had together. I won't let you take away the only thing that's kept me going for 60 years. Marcus held up the diary. You mean this thing? Your obsessive fantasies about a woman who was afraid of you? Give me that. David lunged forward, but his hand passed right through the journal. The psychic disruption from our previous encounter had weakened his ability to interact with physical objects. You want it? Marcus smiled grimly. Then come and get it. He began reading from the diary aloud, starting with the final entry. As his voice filled the apartment, David began to scream. But it wasn't a scream of rage or pain, it was a scream of recognition. For the first time in 60 years, David was hearing his own thoughts from outside his delusion. Stop, he begged. Please stop. Marcus kept reading, moving backward through the diary entries, each one more obsessive and disturbing than the last. As he read, David's form began to change. He looked younger, more confused, like he was reverting back to the person he'd been before his obsession consumed him. I don't understand, David whispered. I loved her. That's when Marcus activated the EMF device. The effect was immediate and horrifying. David's scream turned into Eleanor's scream, and suddenly he was experiencing the night of the murder from her perspective. I could see it happening, his expression changing from confusion to terror as he felt what Eleanor had felt. No, he gasped, his voice now sounding exactly like Eleanor's. David, please, I don't love you. I'm sorry, but I don't love you. Please just leave me alone. But of course, the psychic loop forced him to experience his own response too. I watched his face contort with rage and entitlement as he grabbed for Eleanor's throat, except now he was experiencing it as the victim. The loop repeated. Again and again, David experienced the conversation from Eleanor's perspective, felt her fear and desperation, experienced the moment when his hands closed around her throat and threw her down the stairs. After the 5th repetition, he began to break down. I didn't know, he sobbed. I didn't understand how scared she was. I thought she was just playing hard to get. Keep it running, Elena told Marcus. He's starting to get it. The loop continued. Each time, David experienced more of Eleanor's emotions, her disgust at his stalking, her terror when he cornered her, her desperate hope that someone would save her. And each time, the reality of what he'd done became clearer. By the 10th repetition, David was on his knees, his form barely maintaining coherence. I killed her, he whispered. I actually killed her. Not because I loved her, but because I couldn't stand that she had her own mind. Her own choices. Say it louder, I called out. I killed her. David's voice echoed through the building. I killed Eleanor because I was a selfish, entitled monster who couldn't accept rejection. The moment those words left his mouth, something fundamental shifted. The psychic loop shattered, the temperature returned to normal, and David's form began to dissolve, but this time it was different. This time he was choosing to let go. Thank you, he said, looking directly at me. Thank you for making me see what I really was. Are you ready to move on now? David nodded, and for the first time since I'd seen him, he looked peaceful. I'm ready to face whatever comes next. I'm ready to accept the consequences. As he faded away, I could swear I saw Eleanor standing beside him, no longer broken, no longer afraid. She smiled at me one last time, then they were both gone. The silence that followed was complete. Not just the absence of sound, but the absence of that oppressive spiritual weight that had hung over the building since I'd moved in. Is it over? I asked. Marcus checked his equipment, then nodded. It's over. David's moved on, and his anchoring to this place is completely severed. Elena started packing up the candles and salt. What will you do now, Jake? You could move somewhere else, find a normal apartment without a supernatural history. I looked around apartment 4B, my apartment, finally and truly mine. The hardwood floors gleamed in the lamplight, and the big windows showed a city that looked full of possibilities instead of threats. You know what? I think I'll stay. The rent's cheap, the location's great, and the ghost problem seems to be solved. Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door the next morning with her biggest smile yet. It's really over, isn't it? She said. I can feel the difference throughout the entire building. It's over. What about the rules? That strange list you were given? I pulled the list out of my kitchen drawer and looked at it one more time. 7 rules designed to keep tenants from attracting David's attention. 7 rules that were now completely meaningless. I tore the list in half. No more rules, I said. Just normal apartment living from now on. And that's exactly what I got. Over the following months, 1247 Pine Street became just another apartment building. The turnover rate in 4B returned to normal, meaning people actually stayed for the full length of their leases. The other tenants seemed happier, more relaxed. Even the elevator stopped making those weird groaning sounds. I kept David's diary not as a memento but as a reminder. A reminder that obsession isn't love, that entitlement isn't romance, and that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who convince themselves they're the heroes of their own stories. 6 months later, I got a letter from the building's new management company. Apparently, Mr. Hendricks had disappeared shortly after David moved on, which made sense if he'd just been David's way of handling the practical aspects of being a ghostly landlord. The new owners offered to let me stay at the same rent, which I gladly accepted. They also asked if I knew anything about the building's history, since they'd found some unusual records in the previous management's files. I told them the building had character but nothing they needed to worry about. After all, some stories are better left in the past where they belong. These days, I love living in apartment 4B. It's got everything I wanted when I first moved to the city: independence, affordable rent, and plenty of space. The hardwood floors still creak sometimes and the windows still rattle when the wind picks up, but now those sounds feel comforting instead of threatening. Sometimes, late at night when I'm working on my laptop, I think about David and Eleanor. I hope they found whatever peace they were looking for, wherever spirits go when they finally let go of the world. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the light hits my apartment just right, I could swear I see 2 figures standing by the window, not scary or threatening, but grateful. A reminder that even the most broken people can find redemption if they're willing to face the truth about themselves. But mostly, I just live my life. I work, I hang out with friends, I date occasionally. Normal stuff. The kind of stuff David never got to do because he was too consumed by his obsession to actually live. The rules are gone. The ghost is gone. And apartment 4B is finally just what I always wanted it to be: home. Though I'll tell you one thing, I always read the lease very carefully now, and I always ask about the history of any place I'm thinking of renting. Some lessons are worth remembering even after the danger has passed, because you never know what kind of stories are hiding behind a too-good-to-be-true deal on rent. But that's a story for another day.